We are about to begin another episode of the Prosperident webinar series. From their unique perspective as dentistry's embezzlement experts, Prosperident's team brings you information you will not find anywhere else. Now sit back and relax while Prosperident's Amber Weber, Wendy Askins, and David Harris address the issues that are important to you.
So we love to share our stories to our dental community, and tonight we're sharing an amazing story hidden in plain sight. So, this is a case that my dear friend and colleague completed, and I can't wait to hear the entire story. Most of our webinars last about an hour and a quarter, 1.25 hours, and we will have a Q&A session at the end, and then we also have a chat box. So we hope that you can stay for the entire webinar, but if you can't, we do record these and you'll be able to look at this around Tuesday. As always, our great friends with Altura Periodontics allow us to provide continuing education for those of you who attend. So I'm super excited to hear this great story, and thank you everybody for being part of our audience.
All right. Well, I get the honor of introducing a couple of special people. And I'm going to start with our outside guest for tonight, who's Dr. David Hughes. David is an orthodontist in Virginia. I can say, having gotten to know him, that he is a truly wonderful guy. We met when he phoned me and he said, I think I might have a problem. There he is. I think I might have a problem with my office manager. And he told me a little bit of the story. And after he did, I agreed with him that there was likely a problem. And then we started investigating, and you're going to hear the results of that today. David has become a real evangelist, I think would be a good word, for protecting your practice and not going through what he went through, which was extraordinarily difficult. And of course, we really appreciate him sharing his story with you tonight. Our second special guest is somebody you probably already know. And she's one of our on-camera people, but she's here in a little different capacity tonight. And this is Wendy Askins. And you know her as our very urbane, well-spoken host on camera, but here are some other things about Wendy. First of all, she's what's called a supervising examiner here, and we have 3 levels of examiner. Supervising examiner is the very top, so that means that Wendy handles some of our most difficult, challenging cases, and has done so for a long time. She's been with us. I think, Wendy, next month is 11 years, if I count that correctly. And she has a couple of distinctions here at Prosperident. She has found more embezzled dollars than any other investigator here. And that's saying something, because we've got some big cases from time to time. The second thing is, Wendy has more letters of commendation from clients than any other investigator. So she's really a legitimate Top Gun. She's also an MBA and has earned the Certified Fraud Examiner designation. Before Wendy came to us, I said 10 plus years here, Wendy, but I think it may have been a little more than that. I just didn't want to really telegraph your age. But before she came to us, she ran a multi-practice, multi-doctor orthodontic business. And so she's got a very deep orthodontic pedigree. So that's the stuff you might not know about Wendy. But now what we're going to do is we're going to turn the podium over to David and Wendy. And the way we do this, and those of you who have been with us in previous kind of case presentations like this know this, we have some recorded video, but we also have both Wendy and David here with us live. So we'll play the recordings, and then they'll likely chat about them a little bit. And just to emphasize what Amber said, we've got both chat and Q&A open. So if you have a question for the panel, use the Q&A. If you want everybody to see, use the chat. So the first question that was asked was, well, what caused suspicion here in the first place?
It frankly was not on my radar. In my practice for the first several years, I was very busy focusing on the patients and trying to establish myself in the dental community. I had this very high level of trust in my financial systems in the office. And because I bought a practice just a year and a half after residency, I really had not learned how to run a practice from the financial aspect. Started working with an orthodontic consultant who was kind of a game changer in helping me establish less of a mom and pop business and more of a professional level practice. I gave this very high level of trust to this office administrator. And I frankly turned my attention away from the business in terms of what was happening with the financial resources of the business as they flowed through the practice. My office manager just started behaving differently and not coming to work every day and acting depressed and anxious and staying after work a lot and being sick a lot and not, I felt like there was something going on with her.
So change in behavior was a big thing.
Yes. I mean, obviously we uncovered some very easily identified problems, some transactions that were not authorized. That's what triggered the investigation. But she was present at a consulting event, or I should say a meeting. And the consultant that I work with, an orthodontic consultant that I work with, read her behavior also and said that she's overcompensating. She's trying to telegraph extreme loyalty, and there's no reason to do that. There's something wrong. She's trying to cover something up. You need to go home and look at your accounts payable, so while I was focused on production and collections and everything that we as business owners were worried about the business staying afloat or being profitable. So we look at the incoming funds and we don't look at how it gets diverted potentially. So it opened a floodgate of discovery, and it was beyond upsetting. And just as way of introduction, I don't love talking about this, but I love helping other people avoid it if I can, because it's truly horrible to deal with the aftermath. The key is prevention.
Absolutely. And one thing I'll say about the consulting community is that we get, first of all, a lot of referrals or questions from consultants, and also every consultant has a story about, I was working in this practice and there was somebody there who really didn't want me there. And, we called Prosperident and we dug a little bit deeper into it, and, there was something behind it. I mean, just before we went live tonight, Amber and I were talking about one of her cases, and it's a similar kind of story. There was a consultant who sensed that things weren't right and got us involved, and, it's all kind of unfolding from there. I guess, David, we should let the audience meet your adversary in this.
Right. So this is my former office manager, who I originally met as a mother of two patients. You could say it's hard to see anything different about her. She doesn't read as someone who's up to no good. Military spouse, college educated, very high functioning in the administrative areas, can really take care of the back office in a way that freed me up to see patients. So she worked for me for 11 years. And I would say for the first, I want to say 5 years, she was really key to being part of a growth spurt, during which time we renovated and expanded the office and really took what was originally a smaller practice that I had bought into something of a different size and scope. So I was very happy with the relationship because of that history, but then it was that second half of her tenure there where everything just was falling apart, and I would work with her and talk to her about what was going on, and she passed it off as being health problems, and I don't know. Anyway, it's the key to this slide is just that you can't see or even detect the motivations of people sometimes, and it's better just to have safeguards and assume that the unpredictability of human behavior has to be built into your system. And you can say that your checks and balances are dictated by your insurance, or the accountants require that I do this, or I have to look at this because if I don't, I'll get in trouble with the accountant. You can make, it doesn't have to, there's no reason why you have to hesitate to look carefully at primary documents and everything that's going on. She was good at creating a layer of detachment between me and the data. She would kind of create a report system. It was a secondary kind of doctored set of numbers. So I felt like I was looking at the information, but she had manipulated those figures.
Wow. And then, of course, the obvious question is why she did it. And let's hear what David said earlier.
And as the investigation continued, I was floored, absolutely floored by the extent of the embezzlement and the breadth of complexity of the multiple strategies being used in payroll and the company credit cards and the cash payments that were being diverted and the mirroring of things that we, like vendors and suppliers that we used, there were parallel accounts set up so that the credit card statement would have recognizable vendors, but those purchases were actually going toward personal purchases. And Amazon, there was an Amazon account that was opened for the office, but it wasn't actually the office account. It was under the control of the office manager. It's every conceivable way of stealing funds from the office. And also there was a line of credit and another loan. Multiple loans were opened under the auspices of this renovation, but the line of credit, like the money was being stolen. It was basically a credit. I was being mugged.
Wendy, you were on the front lines of this.
Well, I was going to ask if I could speak to the magnitude that David Hughes is talking about. You know, generally when we do an embezzlement case, we'll find one main area of finances that the thief will focus on, be it revenue or be it expenses. With this particular individual, she targeted revenue, expenses, and payroll, all three of them. Now, although there were three categories of finances, there were different strategies within each category, which is where the complexity that David Hughes is talking about comes from. So, for example, on the revenue side, there was one main methodology that she used. On the expense side, there were four, maybe more. And then on the payroll side, there was also four. And I so wish that we could go into the depth of how this particular theft was committed. Because one thing I think it's very important for people to know is that Dr. David Hughes is a brilliant businessman. And people who go through embezzlement sometimes are placed in a separate category of, you know, you're not paying attention to your business, or, well, you don't really know your numbers. That's absolutely not true with Dr. Hughes. Absolutely. He's a very good businessman. And yet the things that she did were so crafty and so complicated. You would have to be a fraud examiner to be able to figure it out.
Well, thank goodness you're one of the most skilled I've ever met. A couple of takeaways here that I get from this. First of all, most embezzlers who we see use 3 methods. And I think Wendy just said that she saw 9. Which is,
yeah, and don't forget, Dr. Hughes just discovered another one this week. I mean, it's still going on.
Yeah. Okay, so we're up to a nice even 10. In the second thing that comes across is that, like most thieves, it seems like the thief in this case knew the pattern of her doctor really well and designed her theft patterns carefully to kind of evade his reasonable scrutiny. In other words, I think the message for the audience is that, David is not somebody who we would categorize as being asleep at the switch, and this all happened because he ignored his finances. The opposite, we would consider him to be a very adept operator of a practice, and even then, it happened. Sorry, David, we're talking about you like you're a slab of cow there, but anything you want to disagree with?
Well, I will assure you that I've spent many hours, usually in the middle of the night, beating myself up about how this happened. And I checked a lot of things by asking her to run through. We had like these little meetings where I would have her run through everything and show me charts and numbers, like I said earlier. The key is just to, as I said earlier, just prevent. There's no remedy for this after it happens. You won't get restitution in most cases. David Harris will tell you that his clients rarely see the money that's disappeared. You won't get your peace of mind back very soon, and it's a seemingly endless disruption. So,
yes, the vaccination is much better than the cure here for sure.
yes.
What I say about restitution is that every dentist gets something back, and relatively few get it all back. And I think in this case, David did receive some money from the thief. It wasn't a lot, and I assume he also got some modest amount of insurance recovery as well.
That's another curiosity, is that
okay.
Insurance doesn't cover this very well. So anyway, that insurance was not a factor for me.
Okay.
So, but
all right.
The key is that embezzlers spend a lot of careful time with what they're doing. It's a drip every day, and it's hidden and concealed in the same careful, methodical, everyday kind of way. So it's very difficult to unravel it later and figure it out, unless you have Wendy.
Unless you have Wendy. Well, we're both glad that we get to share her. The other thing too that I say a lot, and it really applies, I think, squarely in this case, is that embezzlement's a very unequal battle. In other words, the thief has a lot of advantages over the doctor, and that's one thing that we saw in this case. So let's ask the obvious question: why did Lisa do this?
So heroes do, as I've learned, is that they convince the doctor that they're irreplaceable, and that's an absolute red flag for people that know better and are alert to this. And believe me, I beat myself up about all of these different weaknesses that I had and were obvious to her, but she saw that I was watching certain things and not other things. And honestly, the embezzlement went on for about 5 years. Things were not adding up to me, but she would always say, "Oh, it's understandable," or the costs have gone up, and you have an associate, and the overhead is different. And I said, "Well, where's the pie chart? Show me the overhead." And she was very evasive about that, because a lot of the numbers that we were turning into the consultant and the numbers that she was showing me were all either about the income of the practice, which I believe was correct, but the expenses and all these other things were actually fabricated. I was being shown secondary documentation. This was reports, fabricated reports, And the primary documents of the bank statements, credit card statements, payroll details, those were dismissed as, oh, you don't want to get in the weeds with that. I'll just show you the numbers. These are the numbers. We're doing great. Let's just keep working. And you see the patients, I'll work with everything else. And
Yeah.
Can I
Again,
answer that?
yeah.
Can I go on David's story? One thing I love about working at Prosperident is that we get to see some very private insights to our clients because they're in a very vulnerable place when they're working with us. And also they basically splay open their financials to us, which is a very sensitive topic for everyone. One thing that I remember that hurt me so deeply is that there were some communications that had gone back and forth between David Hughes and Lisa Enzelm. And I saw even the manipulation in those responses that she was giving him. So, for example, she first, when the subject was first broached with her, there was this defensiveness, and then she immediately started blaming him. Saying, I even wrote down the phrases like, you weren't there. Everything I did for you, after everything I did for you, I'm not sure where you would be if it weren't for me. And to David's credit, he was so kind and so well-tempered during his responses to her. It actually amazed me. Of course, at that time, we didn't know the extent of what the theft would be, but he knew it was happening. But he was still very measured and very kind to her. And to me, it says a lot about him and his character to be that measured. Another thing that I noticed through reading is that when the tactics of manipulation weren't working on him anymore, then she changed and she became outright nasty. I mean, just some very mean things that she had said. And again, David was very measured. And one thing that I was hoping that maybe you could address, David Harris, is that upon confrontation in the beginning, she offered him, I think, $160,000 from her retirement plan immediately. And Dr. Hughes kept saying, I need to do some more research on this before we make any type of agreement. I need to speak with legal counsel. I need to speak with other professionals before I agree to accept this. So I'm not agreeing to accept it right now. David Harris, can you tell our audience why that is so important?
Absolutely. And great question, Wendy. Most thieves under report, if they're confessing, they under confess to what they're stealing. And those of you who were with us a couple of months ago when we presented a case that Amber Weber Gonzalez had done, saw that graphically because the thief confessed on video to stealing $25,000. And the real number, Amber, if memory serves me, was about $171,000. And thieves always under confess or under report. And I think sometimes it's because they've lost track. And of course, also because they're trying to minimize punishment. And one of the best ways to minimize punishment is to lay out not what you did, but what you think somebody else would believe. So if you're in the position that David Hughes was in and you're offered a settlement, if you accept it without knowing the real numbers, I mean, you're just like a sightless person in a dark room. You have no idea whether the amount you're being offered correlates or doesn't to what was stolen from you. And from our experience in this case, and also with Amber's case and others, we know that what's being put in front of you probably is not what you lost.
Right.
But yeah, kind of classic manipulations. And I'll tell the audience too, one of the most manipulative questions that a thief can ask you is, "Don't you trust me, doctor?" You know, that's passive aggressive manipulation at its finest. Yeah. As I said earlier, the real impetus to get this investigated came from a consultant. I do see somebody from that consulting firm is in the audience. Karen Moad, welcome. Great to have you with us. So let's let David tell a little bit of the story of the involvement of the consultants here.
My consultant was with me and my office manager at a meeting, and my consultant said, "There's something very wrong here. Your office manager is acting strange, and she seems to be trying to cover her tracks in some way and deflect attention away from something. I need you to go back and look at your accounts payable."
And you did, David, and what did you find?
Well, I found some problems right away. Well, actually, to be honest, I started the investigation with your team, David, and it was in the first fact-finding inquiry to my accountant. My accountant called me within 24 hours and asked me if there was any explanation for this one large check that had been written recently. It was a forged check. And then that snowballed into many other problems. But it was the initial investigation. And as many of you might know, Prosperident has the capability of creating a clone of the Office server and going through it in great detail without having to disrupt Office operations or reveal what they're doing to someone who still might be on payroll. But I found out on a Tuesday evening what was going on, or Monday night maybe, and let my office manager know that she wasn't to come to work for the rest of the week until I figured some things out. And that's when she was sending all those very strange messages. She was panicking, I suppose. But then I had to I didn't fire her in the normal way. I had to use legal counsel to terminate her, create a do not trespass order. It was quite a whirlwind week, but it was really only the beginning. And it's still going on. That was 4 years ago, and the case isn't even finished in the criminal system because of COVID mainly.
Yeah, I think if I remember, she has pled guilty and is now awaiting sentencing. Is that where you are roughly?
That is true, yes.
Okay. But again, let's give a shout out to the consulting community in general and Hummingbird Associates specifically. And Hummingbird, if you're not familiar with the name, is an orthodontic practice consulting company that's been around for a very long time and has a great reputation in the community.
Yes, so, thank you, Karen. If you're there, thank you, Karen.
Yeah, definitely. So, you know, consultants are in more than a few cases, kind of, if I can use another bird analogy, the canaries in the coal mine, who will sense the danger and let the doctor know, and that was certainly the case here. And then, of course, we get to the subject of trust, and something that we hear a lot as the investigators is that, you know, the person stealing was the most trusted person in the office. And my answer to that is, it's kind of the self-fulfilling prophecy. I mean, if you're not able to gain that amount of trust from the doctor, you typically don't get the access to steal. But David had some very interesting comments about the whole question of trust and Lisa the thief, and let's hear what he said.
I kind of because by then things were busy, I just kind of cut and paste that level of trust to the new person. making additional assumptions of integrity based on the fact that she was one of the moms in the practice. She was from a military family. Her husband was working in the Pentagon. I had other military spouses as staff members, and in my experience, they have a very high level of integrity, and a sense of duty and resiliency with having to move so many times. They're just, I think, special people, and I ascribe that to this employee of mine. In retrospect, very mistakenly.
I'll make the opening comment here. You know, life is a lot easier when you can convince yourself that you should trust the people around you. And a lot of times people will revert to some kind of rule to convince themselves that people around them should be trusted. And David mentioned the military spouse one, and there are others. When the previous case that we did with Amber and Dr. Mark Saladin, Mark knew the thief in that case from church. And Mark is a fairly religious guy, I think, and he just assumed that anybody who, you know, went to his church and at least overtly shared those values with him should be trustworthy. And the reality, I think, David, is something different.
Yeah. And I think another thought I had earlier today in anticipation of this meeting tonight is that some people in positions of responsibility in busy businesses, even though dental offices can be relatively small businesses, there can be a lot of cash flow through the business with a lot of income, but also a lot of expenses. And I think that if someone isn't used to that level of responsibility, they misinterpret, or they twist the responsibility into something closer to like a power. It's not that they have responsibility, they have power, and power does strange things to people. So seeing and like shepherding money through the practice, if you feel responsible, then it goes well. But if you feel powerful, then you're like, well, I'm part of this and I deserve to be in on it. I don't know. I try to be an amateur psychologist, and it's just guessing. I don't know, but
no, I like I think you're onto something. And I think a lot of thieves, David, construct a partnership. You know, they view themselves as your partner and that they're integral to your success. And then the next thing they decide is that, and he's not really rewarding me properly for that.
Right.
And you know, they construct this otherwise unrecognized partnership in their head, and then they take what they think you should be paying them.
Right. And even when we tabulated the losses, Wendy even changed the pay on the payroll side. We even changed the salary that she thinks she should have been getting, and then still came up with the losses above that. So I'm not sure where I'm going with that. It's just that she thought perhaps that she was owed more, but she went way overboard because of the whatever feeling she had about getting away with it. It just opened the floodgates and it accelerated. It was not a geometric curve of fraud. It was like accelerating over time. It was worse every year during the years that she was doing it.
Yeah. I noticed that in some of my cases, and even the one we talked about on our last webinar, you started to see a climb, right? It's like each month a little bit more, and not as fearful that something was going to happen.
Yeah, that's a good part of it, Amber. And the other part is too that people's lifestyles tend to climb to reach their incomes. So, you know, if the point of stealing is you're trying to get a little bit ahead of what you're spending, and if you consistently steal $1,000 a month, then at some point your living expenses have sort of moved up to that $1,000, and now you need to steal more to stay in front of it.
Right.
So it tends to be cumulative. The next slide is pretty interesting, and something that we say often is that dentists think that their accountants are doing more to combat the problem of embezzlement than they really are, and David kind of found that out the hard way, and he's going to tell us about it.
I felt vulnerable, and I asked my accountants for an audit because there was a lot of money flowing in and out of the practice for the purpose of the debt service on this expansion renovation. I just wanted to make sure there were eyes on all of those transactions. And it was weird. I don't remember their response precisely, but they basically declined. Like, that wasn't really their role, I guess, in their eyes. And years later, when the embezzlement was discovered, I spoke with David Harris at Prosperident, and he enlightened me to the fact that accountant services are in a tiered system of responsibility. Accountants are really there to properly handle the numbers that you provide them. They're not there to verify your numbers or to babysit your practice. Because of the QuickBooks that we were sending to them with all of the expenses and the credit card statements and the checks and everything, I assumed that they were aware, or at least watching something. And I don't know why I thought that. I just didn't understand.
Yeah, you know what people sometimes don't grasp about the way that dental practice accounting is kept is that you have two sides. You have the revenue side, which is patient payments and insurance payments, and you have the expense side, like payroll and rent and stuff like that. And what's different about a dental practice from most other businesses is that those two are tracked in different pieces of software. So most businesses use a single piece of software, something like QuickBooks, that looks after both revenue and expenses, but that wouldn't work very well in dentistry because you need to bill insurance and use CDT codes and all the kind of specialized parts of the revenue side. So you have this bifurcation between two different pieces of software. What the accountants look at typically is QuickBooks. They spend very little, which really means probably no time, looking at your practice management software. And yet in most theft, that's where the bodies are buried.
Yep.
And
Dave, I like to tell clients that there's like a gray area between your practice management software and what your QuickBooks or your accountant sometimes are. It can be muddy waters, and when you really start diving deep.
It absolutely is. And again, most accountants in doing their work, they don't actually need to look at your practice management software, and they really don't have any expertise. And in fairness to the accountants, there are 100+ types of practice management software out there, and it would be a little bit unrealistic to, even if an accountant specialized in dental practices, it would be a little bit unrealistic for them to learn all of the practice management software that their clients use. So to them, the practice management software is really a black box, and the black box produces a number, and that number goes into QuickBooks, and the accountants spend very little time, again, probably really no time, looking at where that number comes from or whether it is in fact accurate. And I think, David, that's kind of, you realized, I think, at some point that there was an expectation gap between what you thought the accountants were doing and what they actually were able to do.
Right. And when I asked my office manager whether she was reconciling our office management financials with the bank statements and all that muddy waters, I was trying to ask her about that. She would assure me that she was checking all that out, but she would never, raise the hood and show me underneath what was happening.
And to me, the takeaway here is that every employee in a dental practice needs oversight. And if somebody functions without oversight, which is, I think, what you just said was kind of Lisa's condition, that's when stuff's going to happen. So, Wendy, any thoughts here?
I was just thinking about yes, what you're saying is true, but I do have to say in this particular case, Hummingbird alerted David that there were some behavioral issues, and David attested to that. He had seen that in the past. So they hired Prosperident. But like David said, a little while after that, it was his CPA that contacted him and said, hey, I'm seeing a pretty big check here. Did you write that? Did you authorize that? Now, David, I don't know if you had made Keith aware of what was going on in the practice or not about your suspicions, but I do have to give him props for calling David and saying, this doesn't look right. But one of my things I think that people get most confused about is the reconciliation that we're talking about, in that when your CPA produces a P&L for you, they're taking strictly the deposits that have gone in the bank. Well, the thing with theft is that the deposits disappear before they get into the bank. So if you're only looking at B and you're excluding A, you have no idea if those are supposed to match or not, and or if they do match or not. And I'm working on a case right now of a young practitioner who just brought his first practice. And I won't go into all the details, although I know I'm going to tell you they're fascinating because they are. Well, this gentleman had the thought, I'm just going to take a basic Excel spreadsheet and I'm going to, in column A, put how much my practice management software records that was recorded in that software per each month. And then I'm just going to, look at my bank statement up at the top and I'm going to see how much that is. And I'm just going to put them side by side. And I'm just going to kind of keep a running tally of them, right? Just off the top of his head, doesn't know how to run a practice. He just thought, well, this might be a good thing to do. He was short a couple of months in a row, and then wham, over 4 months, it was $100,000 that went missing. And that's when he called us and he said, something is very wrong here. What my practice management software says I recorded in revenue is not being deposited in my bank, and I just don't know where it's going. Well, obviously it was going somewhere, and we figured it out for him. But anyway, that's just to go to the point that a lot of people don't understand that CPAs don't reconcile. They think they do, but they don't. Bookkeepers reconcile.
Yeah, so true. And we have in the audience tonight a dental bookkeeper named Annette Woods, and she just put something in the chat where she said a practice should never do its own bookkeeping, and she's so right. Thanks, Annette. Great to have you here. So then the question comes up, well, what's it like to work with Prosperident? And let's hear what David said in recorded comments. Sorry. And as part of the technical difficulties tonight, I'll mention that I'm not in my office. I'm actually in Boston for the Yankee Dental Conference. So we're doing this on not our usual gear. And that's part of the reason we've had a couple of slip ups. Let me try that again. Yeah. Okay. Please work.
When Prosperident asked me to provide access to certain things, payroll, and they actually did a mirror image of my server eventually and looked at everything in my practice management software. And as the investigation continued, I was floored, absolutely floored by the extent of the embezzlement and the breadth of complexity of the multiple strategies being used in payroll and the company credit cards and the cash payments that were being diverted.
I have to compliment David Hughes as well, because he was very proactive in getting us documents and things that we needed. I mean, David, you remember we were trying to pull down some payroll records, and he didn't even have He didn't even have access to his payroll records. He had been locked out of it. And
she deleted everything on her computer in the few minutes that she had on the day that she left.
Yeah, but that's one of the main keys to a successful examination, is if the client will get you the documentation that you need. And David was just awesome at that. I mean, no matter how hard he struggled trying to get new passwords and trying to prove that he was the actual owner of the business, even though he didn't have the password, he really struggled with that, but he did a good job. So my compliments to you, David.
Thank you. I had two of my staff sidelined for 4 months, cataloging all of the data before the report went to the police. So it's a lot of work, and it's a great distraction, as I mentioned, to the practice as a whole. So.
Absolutely. And just a reminder for the audience, we're getting close to the end of our kind of prepared part of the presentation, and after that we're going to go to questions and answers. And just a reminder to, as you think of them, put your questions in the Q&A. Amber's watching them quite closely with Wendy, and they'll kind of collate them, and we'll use them in a few minutes. So we're almost there. I guess what we all want to hear from David is, what did you learn from this? And he made some great remarks in the recorded video. So let's make that play.
I learned this lesson the hardest way possible, and that is that doctors tend to focus on new patient starts, referrals, basically the production end of the practice. Finances, once money comes into the practice and is flowing through the practice with the accounting systems, with accounts payable, accounts receivable, payroll, there are a lot of places where you can spring leaks, both through negligence or just not following up with, insurance delinquencies, patient delinquencies. There are lots of little procedural things that can make a leaky barrel problem, which is about competency and doing things the right way and on time. And I did worry about those things a little bit, and I would obviously keep up with those numbers from the financial coordinator. But I didn't think of fraud as being one of those things.
I love that point, David, because it seems like every time I go to an orthodontic meeting, especially, there are tons and tons of speakers on increasing production, how to connect with your referring offices, increase your referrals, increase your production. And sometimes I think, man, we are missing a huge part of it. And that's the other side of it, that the more you produce, the more you collect, the more money I have available to steal from. So, but I have a question for you. What are you doing differently now in your practice than you were prior to this event?
Well, it's actually fairly simple. I'm just watching everything that I should have been watching from the beginning, but more specifically, Prosperident has a prepackaged system that you can bring into your practice. It's called the Practice Protection System. I think that's called. Is that yeah?
Owner proactive strategies. Yeah, exactly.
Yes. Yeah. So you don't have to reinvent the wheel, and it shows you step by step how to create these systems of oversight, and it has procedures for each team member and the practice owner to follow up on all the different things that need to happen in the office. So I'm reviewing statements, and I'm reviewing everything that I need to look at every month. And we run different kinds of reports that I didn't run before. And I look at the the closing out of the day and everything like that we do. And we had separation of duties before, which gave the appearance of oversight, but my office manager had manipulated the social structure of the office. And Wendy can talk about that, where they can almost change the loyalty structure of the office and start becoming like a competing like center of authority. And so they start calling the shots a little bit. And like, anyway, it's complicated, but just follow that system. It's much easier just to get that on board with the people that have seen everything and have covered all the bases with that system. So Prosperident will help you with that. That's the main thing to take away from this meeting, in my opinion, is to get on board with that.
Yeah, absolutely. And we'll just play his recorded comments quickly, but I think it's pretty similar.
Yeah. Embezzlement, dealing with embezzlement is about prevention. I'm part of an unenviable fraternity in my state with 2 other orthodontists that have had this happen to them. All 3 of us are speaking to our local societies to try to help others. You won't get your money back. You won't get your sleep back. Just prevent this from happening. Put the safeguards in place. Please work with Prosperident. I'm not aware of anyone else that does this in the way that they do it and helps you.
Wow. Well,
All right.
David, that was that was great.
Can I say one more thing before we move on real quick? I'm sorry. You know, I'm just attached to this case. I'm attached to David Hughes. Just so everyone can kind of get the magnitude of this, if you haven't already, this case went before a grand jury, and they did a true bill of 47 felony counts. That's amazing. It's shocking. It's shocking in someone could steal that much. It's shocking that Dr. Hughes could have the wherewithal and the strength to withstand it and to go through it and come out on the other side as well. So David, your case went before a grand jury, received a true bill. Charges were filed. She pled guilty. And so I think we covered where we are now with that. You're still fighting for that. Although she's pled guilty, you haven't gotten to sentencing yet. It's been continued, right?
Correct. It'll be finishing up at the end of February.
Okay, that's what I thought.
Yeah, thank goodness. And I don't think in the presentation we actually gave an amount to the audience. And David, I know it's a little bit of an uncomfortable topic, but why don't you give people some idea of what an enterprising thief can do to a doctor?
Well, when you spread it out over the number of years and you look at it in percentage terms, she was skimming during a period of growth where it was less easy to notice, but the actual dollar amount was quite shocking. It was north of 370,000 in money missing, but then in Wendy's report, after adding lawyers' fees and other costs, I think the final number was 428,000, and that again has gone up because I've found many other instances since those numbers were compiled. Up to and including just this week, we found another completely novel strategy that she had been using for something different with health insurance. I mean, yeah, like the employee benefits. So it's life-changing. Like, it actually changes the timeline of like a retirement a little bit. I mean, it's just not a fun number to talk about, but it's a high number.
One other thing I'd like, yeah, this is Q&A. It's Q&A time. I'm sorry, I keep talking. Another thing that I wanted to point out is a significant amount of this particular theft was committed through payroll fraud. Remember, there were 4 different methodologies through it, and it's just absolutely disgusting. One of the things we've always talked on our webinars about how difficult it is to prove payroll fraud beyond a reasonable doubt, because it's always one person's word against another person's word. One thing that David had, which was like the foundation of his payroll case, is that in his policy manual, he had laid out and structured what raises were going to be based on and what bonuses were going to be based on. And when I first talked to David and we started talking about payroll, I thought, oh no, this is going to be difficult. I hope we have what we need. And sure enough, he said, well, it's right here in my policy manual. I'll send it to you. And there it was in writing. So props to him as well. And another example of why employee policy manuals are so, so very important.
Right.
Yes, Wendy, that's something that's very near and dear to my heart as well. My previous payroll case didn't have as good as documentation, so it was harder to prove.
So you know how hard they are. You know how hard they are to fight unless you've got proper documentation for them. So my friend Laurie wants to know and wants us to speak to the staff manipulation issues that Dr. Hughes alluded to. I can give my view on that, in that exactly like what David said, part of their gain is to get your loyalty away from the business owner and to them. That way, if they happen to see anything, if a staff member happens to see something, they won't say anything. If a staff member happens to see something, they'll think of the thief in the best light, if you will. And number two, it's a position of power. That's what I think it is. I think it's taking power away from the owner and placing it on yourself. In Dr. Hughes' specific instance, she would give generous loans to other staff members without seeking Dr. Hughes's consent prior to doing that. So that's one way that she gained their loyalty and bypassed him. It was like, shh, let's not tell Dr. Hughes because he might not agree with it, but I'm going to go ahead and do it for you anyway. So that's, Dr. Hughes, do you have anything to add?
That's a good example, but she also managed to at least make people believe that she had power over their employment at all, because she would, I don't know, you could argue that she was successful in blackballing a couple of employees. Like, she had my ear, I guess, and she let everyone know that if you like your job, you're gonna, just stay in line. And she did that without my even seeing that side of her, because she never really showed that personality to me. But it came out, as you mentioned, when she was cornered at the very end. She lashed out in a way that I had never seen. So another psychology moment.
Absolutely. Well, we're getting close to time, but Amber, any questions that we want to bring forward?
I do have a question that somebody asked about the payroll. Did you do payroll in-house or was it outsourced?
So it's processed through an outside third party, a large provider, ADP, everyone might know them.
Yep.
And we would do the time, and like the time sheets and everything was kind of transferred over from our practice management. So there's a lot of, it wasn't all that seamless. And I would monitor certain parts of the payroll, but one thing I do differently now is that I'm the one clicking approve and I'm reviewing it. No one finishes the payroll. They just fill in all the blanks, then I review it and approve it. I just did that an hour ago before this seminar. That's a big thing that I do now that before I thought I was too busy to do, but I'm not too busy to do that now.
Oh, good for you.
And then another question for someone who arrived a little late. Over what period of time, how many years did the embezzlement occur? How long did it
So
occur, Wendy? Was it a
the
1
employee
year or
worked,
2?
so the employee worked for me for 11 years, and
Mm-hmm.
the embezzlement seems to have taken place only during the last 5 years. And that's based
Okay.
on extrapolating backwards to when it seemed to go down to nothing. But I don't actually have bank records from that far back to investigate the very beginnings of it. So about half the time. So that's another lesson, is that someone who is trustworthy perhaps won't necessarily stay that way. So you can't think of people as being static throughout their lives and throughout their time in the practice.
Yeah, what you said, David, almost verbatim is what I say to people. You know, we cannot view trust as a static concept that you address once when you first meet somebody and then you never reopen again. I mean, people's position in life change, their view of your practice and what their compensation should be for being involved in it change. And unfortunately, as uncomfortable a concept as this is for some people, trust is something we've got to re-examine.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Right. We probably have time for about one more question.
This is a good one. Was your legal counsel, did you have legal advice, David, when you decided to terminate her? Did you confront her with what you had uncovered when you decided to terminate her?
Yeah. So I did get legal counsel before I even saw her. From the time that I realized something was wrong, or specifically wrong, to the time that I met her, I'd already been in touch with lawyers, and she came into work the morning that I actually, it's funny, I didn't confront her initially. She came into work a little bit late, as usual, for that time that she was with me, and she threw a little tantrum because she said she couldn't get into the payroll system or the bank. I had changed all the passwords and she was locked out, and she was upset. She didn't understand what was
I bet she was.
And so I confronted her, and I only talked to her for a short time, and she had to leave for an appointment or something, and she never came back to the office. I had lawyers involved with all of the firing process. So you have to have help with these things.
So someone I'm sorry, someone asked, did you, what was that last question, Amber? Did you immediately
end access to all software? Mm-hmm.
Okay,
I did, but I guess she was locked out of everything, all the main systems, but the one thing she did was she deleted all of her work email, like 100% of her work email. That was one thing that we didn't get, but the other thing that took me a couple weeks to remember is that she had the password to our security cameras. So she was at home watching us from home, going around the office. And that's how I found out that there was a very incriminating file in one of these drawers, because I went into her office and I opened this particular drawer, and I got an immediate text from her saying, "Oh, I just remembered there's a file. It's personal. It's not for the office. I just need you to mail it to me." And that's the first file that I drove it directly to the county seat, to the police department. That was the first evidence of that file. It was full of personal stuff, like house renovation level expenses, which is what she was doing partly.
Wow.
So anyway, so just
that's interesting too, and I'm glad you brought that point up, David, because Prosperident has an employee separation checklist.
Yes, that's correct.
Because I love that you're giving a firsthand account of things that you just don't think about.
Yeah.
Right.
Especially, at this particular time period, I always say, I mean, you're heartbroken. Your mind is blown. You're heartbroken. You're scared of what's going to happen to your business and your finances, and how much is it, and how deep does it go? And who would think change the password on your security camera?
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Totally understandable.
Yeah.
Well, wow. We had we had some terrific questions from people, and I think we got to most of them. If you do have questions about your own situation, or you want to learn more about the protection stuff that David Hughes talked about, we're happy to talk to you after. If you enjoyed tonight, especially our technical hiccup at the front when we had the repeating loop going around, we would love you forever if you left us a 5-star Google review, and that's where you can do it. Just a couple of things in closing. First of all, I would like to send a huge thank you to our guest, Dr. David Hughes. I mean, he came on here tonight, and bared his soul for the benefit of the audience, and we are just so grateful. And also our guest / host, Wendy Askins, who was there with David through this whole process. Really great insight from both of you tonight. Of course, Amber Weber has been handling the questions as ably as she always does, and our off-camera person, Sheila O'Driscoll, who many of you got emails from and stuff. Want to thank all them, but David Hughes, we are so grateful to have you. I will mention that we asked David if he had a specific charity that he supported, and he mentioned Operation Smile, and we've made a donation on his behalf. So, David, thank you again so much.
You're welcome. Thank you, David. Thanks, everyone.
And finally,
Bye.
if you need to reach us, there's how to do it. And I'd like to again thank our guests, our hosts and behind the camera crew, and also you, our audience, for being there and just amazing participation tonight. I couldn't believe how much the chat was lighting up, and we also had some great questions. We do not have a date or a topic for our next one yet. The crew will be getting together in the next couple of weeks to decide on that. We'll get back to you. We are certainly going to continue more stories like this, where we have people who have learned some lessons the hard way come on and tell their story. So we'll look forward to more of this in the future. Everybody enjoy the rest of your evening, and we'll all be back with you soon. Good night.
Bye.
Good night.
Thank you.
Bye.
This concludes this episode of the Prosperident webinar series. The team will be back soon with more tools and ideas. If you have questions about this webinar, if you would like to discuss your practice with one of us, or if there is a topic you would like to see in a future webinar, we would love to hear from you. You can contact Prosperident through its website, www.prosperident.com, or by calling 888-398-2327.